good evening and welcome to the Menil Collection. I'm Joseph Helfenstein, director here of the museum. And before we begin, may I ask you, as always, to turn off your cell phone if you haven't done so yet. That would be very nice. Belgian painter René Magritte has long been associated with the collection and, of course, with Dominique and John de Menil, and after them, of course, with this institution, and with reason. The number of Magrittes in the Menil collection is rivaled only by those of the Royal Museum of Fine Arts of Belgium. From the first exhibition of their Magrittes in 1964 in Little Rock, Arkansas, kind of surprising, but that was the first exhibition of Magritte, museum exhibition of Magritte in 1964. The de Menils and then their museum have remained actively involved in the presentation and understanding of his art. Most recently at Saturday's Magritte Symposium. Maybe some of you have had a chance to attend. That was actually a fascinating day full of Magritte. As the Magritte exhibition, co-organized by the Menil Collection, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Art Institute of Chicago, begins its stay here in Houston, the annual Marion Barthelme Lecture enabled us to have Magritte scholar Sarah Whitfield here too. More about the lecture series in a moment. Few people have been more central to Magritte scholarship than Sarah Whitfield, who in a few moments presents the talk, Why Magritte Matters. Sarah is a London-based independent art historian, writer, and curator. She is the co-author and editor of René Magritte Newly Discovered Works, which is volume number 6, just published just 2 years ago, actually, just 2 years ago, the last volume. Curator of the 1992 Magritte exhibition, seen at the Menil, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She was also the author of its catalog. She has curated many exhibitions of 20th century artists, including Pierre Bonnard at the Tate Gallery in 1998, Lucio Fontana at the Hayward Gallery in 2000, and Malcolm Morley at the Hayward Gallery as well in 2001. In addition to her advisory role at the Arshile Gorky Foundation, she recently completed the Catalogue Raisonné of William Scott, so she really knows, and has already survived 2 Catalogue Raisonnés. I don't know any other person who has actually realized that. That is in itself an amazing achievement. She is a member of the Comité Magritte, the authentication committee set up by the Fondation Magritte in 2000. The annual Marion Barthelme Lecture brings to Houston a distinguished speaker to discuss an artist in our collection. Now, in its 2nd year, the lecture honors the memory of Marion Barthelme Fort, Vice President of the Board of Trustees of the Menil Collection. Active in the artistic and literary cultures of Houston and beyond, Marion served on the boards of, among others, the Camera, Imprint, the Houston Seminar, Gulf Coast, the Chinati Foundation, and the Alley Theater. Tonight's lecture is one of a group of programs presented in conjunction with Magritte, The Mystery of the Ordinary. A poster describing all the public programs for Magritte is available as you leave the museum. If you don't have that yet, please pick it up. There are some more wonderful programs coming here soon. I would like to thank my colleagues, Carl Killian, Public Programs Director, and Tony Martinez, Public Programs Coordinator, for realizing yet another distinguished event here at the Menil. And now please join me in welcoming Sarah Whitfield.
Thank you, Joseph, and thank you very much for inviting me to give this lecture. I think it's a great honor to be asked to give the 2nd Marion Barthelme lecture, and moreover, it's a huge delight to come back to Houston. I haven't been here for a long while, and to come back while there is a really wonderful Magritte exhibition, beautifully displayed, I have to say, makes it an even greater pleasure. And I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that the collection has hung a room of late Magrittes just down the corridor. And to me, that's an essential part of the exhibition, so don't miss it. Making art is often a question of private necessity. That is to say, the artist makes use of his own preoccupations, fears, even obsessions, to propel the work in a certain direction, to exorcise his or her demons, one might say. However much the artist may want to explore other directions, these deep-rooted emotions, if one can call them that, keep pulling at them and tugging them back. Magritte is one such artist, and the exhibition here at the Menil Collection, which follows him from 1926 up to 1938, gives us an excellent opportunity to ask ourselves what form these preoccupations might take. I'm going to begin in 1938, but only as a way of circling back both to the earlier years and then beyond to look at examples of the later work. Wherever possible, I've chosen examples of works that are either in the Magritte exhibition or that belong to the Menil Collection. I should also say at this point that when I was first asked to give this lecture, I was asked to supply a title. And I came up with this title. And then, of course, I sat down to write the lecture. But I just ask you to be patient. I will get to the answer that I have posed at the beginning, but you may have to wait. In November 1938, when Magritte was approaching 40, he gave a lecture at the Musée des Beaux-Arts in Antwerp entitled La Ligne de Vie, which translates as lifeline, which has more than one meaning. Now, this is a photograph that he chose to put on the cover of the program of that lecture. The lecture was a description, or rather an explanation, of his career up to that date. As Anne Umland says in her excellent essay in the exhibition catalogue, the lecture marks the point when Magritte needed to pause and take stock. He'd been painting solidly since his student days in Brussels. He had lived and worked in Paris between 1927 and 1930, where he'd been close to the centre of surrealism at a particularly lively period in the movement's history. And for the past few years, he'd taken part in every surrealist exhibition that mattered. Moreover, 1938 had been a very good year for him. It had begun with his second exhibition at the Julian Levy Gallery in New York, followed by his inclusion in the International Exhibition of Surrealism organized by André Breton and Paul Éluard at the Galerie des Beaux-Arts in Paris. In April, he was given a one-man show in London at the aptly named London Gallery, then run by his Brussels friend E.L.T. Messens, who also acted as his agent. And so, with recent exhibitions in 3 capital cities, New York, Paris, London, it could be said that Magritte was well on his way to achieving an international reputation. It was a good time to take stock. His Antwerp lecture was largely built around 2 stories that illustrate particular milestones in his career. And he opened his talk with the first one, which goes like this. As a child, I used to play with a little girl in an old provincial cemetery. We would go down into the family vaults when we would lift their heavy doors and would come up into the light again to find an artist at work on a very picturesque path where broken stone columns were scattered among dead leaves. The art of painting seemed to me vaguely magical, and the painter to be gifted with superior powers. This is an old postcard of the provincial cemetery at Soigny, with some views taken earlier this year. So that's how it looks now. In line with Surrealist thought, this opening passage points to the significance of childhood. Childhood being seen by the Surrealists as a state of grace, not yet contaminated by social conventions. And Magritte tells that story in terms of a simple allegory. Two children emerge from the darkness of the underground vaults of a cemetery into the light of an autumn day where art is revealed to them along with the superior, even magical powers of the artist. In essence, the story is about the journey from darkness and ignorance towards light and revelation. But, and this is typical of Magritte, it is a story rooted firmly in real life, even if it is told with some poetic license, as we shall see. As a child, he had played in an old cemetery when he visited his aunts Flora and Maria and his paternal grandmother, Marie, in Soigny, which is a small town in the province of Hainaut, not far from where he lived in Châtelet. And there you see the grandmother with the two aunts outside their shop. His grandmother and her two daughters kept a shop in La Rue Henri-le-Roi, a street that runs from the vast Romanesque church, the Collégiale de Saint-Vincent, straight into the cemetery. And as you can see from photographs taken earlier this year, this part of Soigny has remained more or less unchanged. The cemetery, however, has changed, or rather it has been tidied up and many of the tombs removed. The underground vaults in the old cemetery have also disappeared. They are said to have been sealed after a small boy broke his leg climbing out of one. But an old guardian I met when I visited the cemetery in the early 1980s, and who told me the story about the boy's accident, also remembered hearing about the Magritte family. He recalled stories about an artist from Brussels who used to regularly set up his easel in the cemetery, the same painter who, we can be fairly certain, was the artist Magritte mentions in his lecture, and who can now be securely identified as Léon Huygens, who lived from 1876 to 1919. Credit for this identification must go to two Belgian scholars, Jacques Roisin, whose valuable research in Soigny unearthed many stories, many of them quite lurid, about Magritte's youth, and Laurent Buzine, who some years ago found this invitation card to an exhibition of works by Huygens entitled Old Corners of Soigny, held at the town hall in December 1912. The exhibition included 4 views of the old cemetery, one of which is reproduced on this invitation. I've not been able to find any other painting by Huygens of the old cemetery, but here is an example of the sort of painting Magritte might have seen when he first encountered the painter. It seems that Huygens, who had studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Brussels, was resident in Soigny for about a year in 1912, when Magritte would have been in his early teens. Now, Magritte describes himself in the story as a child, and while he must have made regular visits to his father's family, this meeting with the artist in the cemetery very probably took place when he was 13 years old. Roisin was also able to identify the young girl in the story, Émilie Croix, said to be 2 years older than Magritte, and whose father looked after the cemetery. And the Croix family lived in that white house there. Magritte has carefully reshaped the story in order to emphasize the relationship of everyday to the mystery of art, a relationship central to his way of working, how to paint the observable world, as the painter in the cemetery was doing, without losing sight of what Magritte called the disturbing poetic effect, which is how the act of painting appeared to the young teenager as he climbed out of the vault and came face to face with the artist at work at his easel. Now, Magritte uses the story to let his audience know that art is about revelation. But of course, it is a story that has been carefully crafted. For a start, this was not his first encounter with an artist, as we are rather led to believe. We know that Magritte was already painting by 1910, having joined a weekly art class in Châtelet. Indeed, he showed so much promise that in 1911 his proud father had put one of his paintings on public display in the hallway of the family house. But even though Magritte has artfully adjusted a few facts, the story obviously had a meaning that was extremely important to him. And as I hope to show, his memories of the